Have you ever had someone lie about you? Have you ever been punished for doing something that you did not do? Have you been accused of doing something that you didn't do? Well, this happened to Jesus right after Judas came with soldiers and had Jesus arrested in the Garden of Gethsemane. We are going to take a look at the trial and crucifixion of Jesus using all four accounts, all four gospel accounts. So let's begin in John 18. John 18, verse 12. Then the soldiers with their commander and the Jewish guards arrested Jesus. They tied him and led him first to Annas. Annas was the father-in-law of Caiaphas, the high priest that year. Caiaphas was the one who had told the Jews that it would be better if one man died for all the people. Now, Caiaphas had no idea how insightful that statement would be. Jesus would die for all people. This one man, Jesus, would die for all people, for all mankind throughout all of history. But Caiaphas did not realize what he was saying. Okay, next let's go to Matthew 26, starting in verse 57. Those men who arrested Jesus led him to the house of Caiaphas, the high priest. The teachers of the law and the Jewish elders were gathered there. Drop down to verse 59. The leading priest and the Jewish council, also called the Sanhedrin, tried to find something false against Jesus so that they could kill him. Many came and told lies about him, but the council could find no real reason to kill Jesus. Then two people came and said, "This man said, I can destroy the temple of God and build it up again in 3 days." Then the high priest stood up and said to Jesus, "Aren't you going to answer? Don't you have something to say about the charges against you?" Jesus said nothing. Again, the high priest said to Jesus, "You must swear to this. I command you by the power of the living God to tell us the truth. Tell us, are you Christ, Son of the living God?" Jesus answered, "Yes, I am. But I tell you, in the future you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of God, the powerful one, and you will see him coming in clouds in the sky." When the high priest heard this, he was very angry. He tore his clothes and said, "This man has said things that are against God. We don't need any more witnesses. You all heard him say these things against God. What do you think?" The people answered, "He is guilty. He must die." Then the people there spit in Jesus' face, beat him with their fists, and others slapped him. When the Sanhedrin put Jesus on trial there that night, they were breaking their own law. They were not supposed to be trying their people at night, punishing them, sentencing them to death. They were breaking their own laws. Let's turn to Luke 23 to see what happens next. Luke 23, starting in verse 1. The whole group stood up and led Jesus to Pilate. They began to accuse Jesus. They told Pilate, "We caught this man telling things that were confusing our people. He says they should not pay taxes to Caesar." Well, that's not true. He did tell them to render unto Caesar what is Caesar's when he pulled the coin out of the fish's mouth that had Caesar's face on it. He calls himself the Christ, a king. They didn't understand what kind of king Jesus was. Pilate asked Jesus, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Jesus answered, "Yes, that is right." Pilate said to the leading priest and the people, "I find nothing wrong with this man." They said again and again, "But Jesus is making trouble with the people. He teaches all around Judea. He began in Galilee, and now he is here." Well, Pilate really didn't see the problem, and he really didn't want to be involved. So since he saw that Jesus was a Galilean, he thought he would hand him over to Herod, who was the authority of Galilee. Herod happened to be in Jerusalem that night. All right, so now we're going to read Luke 23, 6 through 11. Pilate heard this and asked if Jesus was from Galilee. If so, Jesus was under Herod's authority, and Herod was in Jerusalem at that time. So Pilate sent Jesus to him. When Herod saw Jesus, he was very glad. He had heard about Jesus and wanted to meet him for a long time. Herod was hoping to see Jesus work a miracle. Herod asked Jesus many questions, but Jesus said nothing. The leading priests and teachers of the law were standing there. They were shouting things against Jesus. Then Herod and his soldiers made fun of Jesus. They dressed him in a kingly robe and sent him back to Pilate. Okay. Herod just wanted to be entertained, and that was not happening, and he had had enough of it. So he sent him back to Pilate. Let's go to Mark 15 and see what happens there. Mark 15, we're going to get a little bit more of the story. Mark 15, starting in verse 6. Every year at the Passover time, the governor, which is Pilate, would free one person from prison. He would free any person the people wanted him to free. At that time, there was a man named Barabbas in prison. He was a rebel and he committed murder during a riot. The crowd came to Pilate and asked him to free a prisoner, as he always did. Pilate asked them, "Do you want me to free the king of the Jews?" Pilate knew that the leading priest had given Jesus to him because they were jealous of him. But I think Pilate was hoping they would let Jesus go because Jesus made no sense to kill him. Barabbas made more sense. Barabbas was a true criminal. Let's find out in Matthew 27 what happens next. Matthew 27, verse 19 through 24. Pilate said these things while he was sitting on the judge's seat. And while he was sitting there, his wife sent a message to him. The message said, "Do not do anything to that man. He is not guilty. Today I had a dream about him, and it troubled me very much." So here, Pilate's wife has warned him, don't have anything to do with this plot against Jesus. But the leading priest and the elders told the crowd to ask for Barabbas to be freed and for Jesus to be killed. And Pilate said, "I have Barabbas and Jesus. Which do you want me to set free for you?" And the people answered, "Barabbas." Pilate asked, "What should I do with Jesus, the one called the Christ?" Hoping still they would release him. They all answered, "Kill him. Kill him." And the crowd cried out, "Kill him! Kill him! Crucify him!" Pilate asked, "Why? Why do you want me to kill him? What wrong has he done?" But they shouted even louder, "Crucify him!" Pilate saw that he could do nothing about this, and a riot was starting. So he took some water and he washed his hands in front of the crowd. Then he said, "I am not guilty of this man's death. You are the ones who are causing it." Let's go to Mark 15. Back to Mark 15, and we are going to read verses 16 through 24. Pilate's soldiers took Jesus into the governor's palace, called the Praetorium. They called all the other soldiers together. They put a purple robe on Jesus. Then they used thorny branches to make a crown. They put it on his head. Then they called out to him, "Hail, King of the Jews!" The soldiers beat Jesus on the head many times with a stick. They also spit on him. Then they made fun of him by bowing on their knees and worshiping him. After they finished making fun of him, the soldiers took off the purple robe and put his own clothes on him again. Then they led Jesus out to the palace to be killed on a cross. There was a man from Cyrene coming from the fields to the city. The man was Simon. The soldiers forced Simon to carry the cross for Jesus. They led Jesus to the place called Golgotha, which means place of the skull. At Golgotha, the soldiers tried to give Jesus wine to drink. The wine was mixed with myrrh, but he refused to drink it. The soldiers nailed Jesus to a cross. Then they divided his clothes among themselves. They drew lots to decide which clothes each soldier should get. Let's turn to Matthew 27. Matthew 27, 45 through 54. At noon, the whole country became dark. This darkness lasted for 3 hours. About 3 o'clock, Jesus cried out in a loud voice, "Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani." This means, my God, why have you left me alone?" Some versions say, "Why have you forsaken me?" Some of the people standing there heard this. They said, "He is calling Elijah." Quickly, one of them ran and got a sponge. He filled the sponge with vinegar and tied it to a stick. Then he used the stick to give the sponge to Jesus to drink from it. But the other said, "Don't bother him. We want to see if Elijah will come save him." Again, Jesus cried out in a loud voice. Then he died. Keep reading, verse 51. Then the curtain in the temple split into two pieces. The tear started at the top and tore all the way down to the bottom. Also, the earth shook and the rocks broke apart. The graves opened, and many God's people who had died were raised from death. They came out of the graves after Jesus was raised from death. They went into the holy city, and many people saw them. The army officer and the soldiers guarding Jesus saw this earthquake and everything else that happened. They were very frightened and said, "He really was the Son of God." Let's go to John 19. Let's read verse 31 through 34. This day was preparation day. The next day was a special Sabbath day. The Jews did not want the bodies to stay on the cross on the Sabbath day, so they asked Pilate to order that the legs of the men be broken and the bodies be taken away. So the soldiers came and broke the legs of the first men on the cross beside Jesus. Then they broke the legs of the man on the other cross beside Jesus. But when the soldiers came to Jesus, they saw that he was already dead, so they did not break his legs. But one of the soldiers struck his spear into Jesus' side, and at once blood and water came out. All right, now let's turn to Luke 23. Luke 23, verse 44 through 48. It was about noon, and the whole land became dark until 3 o'clock in the afternoon. There was no sun. The curtain of the temple was torn into two pieces, and Jesus cried out in a loud voice, "Father, I give you my life." After Jesus said this, he died. The army officer there saw what happened. He praised God, saying, "I know this was a good man." Many people had gathered there to watch this thing. When they saw what happened, they returned home. They beat their chests because they were so sad. This day was a very dark and sad day for Jesus, for our Lord, for the apostles who were there watching and did not understand. But today we know that this day was necessary for one man to die for all people. Jesus was accused of the sins that we ourselves are all guilty of. And he took those sins and he was punished for them. He was punished for us in our place.